We see you out there hustling. You've got goals. Career, friends, fitness, fun. It's a lot, and you're crushing it. If you ever need a little oomph to keep on keeping on, Ollie's got your back. From mood and sleep support to daily energy and laser focus, we've got vitamins and supplements to keep you on the go. Find your new go-to gummies at ollie.com.
This episode is brought to you by IBM. I'm Howard Beauville, head of IBM Cloud Platform. Last year, cyber crimes cost the world $6 trillion. To address today's threats, clients need technology that gives access to data without compromising it. IBM's open, secure hybrid cloud architecture ensures you are the only one who can access your data and keeps everyone else out, even us. Visit ibm.com/cloud to learn more.
I'm Nick Westergaard, and this is On Brand, helping you tell your story. My guest this week is Cindy McGovern.
It's also about how we're building that trust again with those folks around us, because if we're selling something and we're selling it inconsistently, or we're selling them something and then not delivering on it, that's doing nothing but tearing apart the brand you're trying to create as well.
Dr. Cindy McGovern is the founder of Orange Leaf Consulting, which helps organizations, entrepreneurs, and individuals create dynamic and robust sales processes. Before launching her business, McGovern was a college professor of communication as well as a successful sales professional. She has worked with hundreds of organizations of all sizes and specialties across the globe and is now one of the most sought-after business and sales authorities. Her latest book is Sell Yourself. Cindy McGovern, welcome to On Brand.
Thank you so much for having me, Nick. It's a pleasure to be here.
I am excited to chat with you because this is one of those convergence episodes where we have sales, we have communication, we have your personal brand. I almost feel like I see three overlapping circles there, but I don't know which one makes sense to start with. Is there one of those circles that stands out to you where you think you have to start the process of selling yourself?
Well, I think you start the process internal, actually. It starts with sort of an internal inventory of who you want to be known as, what's the legacy you want to leave, and then it sort of goes external from there.
Okay. So answering that big question of what you want to be known for in terms of your brand, in terms of what it is you're communicating. So then where do you go from there?
So the first thing is figuring out really what that legacy is, but also who can help you to keep the narrative of that legacy going. And regardless of your job title, your job role, it's who you are as a person. And so once you start thinking about that, then you start thinking about what information is out there about you that either supports that narrative that you want or doesn't, and then making sure that others can tell your story with you and for you to reinforce that brand. But so much of it is that people don't realize they have a brand already, and you're already selling that brand day in and day out. I would invite people to explore, are they doing it on purpose? Is it really what they mean to be selling?
That's such a good point. I think, and I love what you said, it bears repeating that a lot of times, especially when it comes to a personal brand, I sometimes feel like that's a label that hangs us up. We think that that means that we have a logo, that we do other branded activities, but it's really something very different. And as you note, it is something that many that most of us have already. I like what you said about the importance of that personal inventory that we need to take to get a handle on that. If that kind of perspective is challenging, are there any tips or tricks for understanding what you may already be putting out there?
Yeah, absolutely. And you actually said something really important. It should be challenging because it's going to be holding up that mirror, right? And so we might be finding things that we don't necessarily want people thinking about us that they are. And so in doing this honest inventory, it should be about soliciting feedback and being honest about sort of what you're able to keep up. And this is something that when I'm working with people on their personal branding, they struggle with a little bit because they think, oh, well, I want to be, all these great things. You got to have a pretty big motor to keep that up. So authenticity is one of the most important parts. And so when you are getting that honest inventory and you are looking for that feedback and you're really seeing what message you're sending out there, if it's not the message you want to be sending, taking a pause, looking at how you can shift that message and making sure that in fact, you'll be able to keep that up. It's not a persona. It's not something fake. It's really who you are. But it's sort of like there's an interview in my book with a newscaster, and he says he's him plus 10%. And I think that is our public facing personas. We're ourselves plus 10%. You combed your hair, you put your clothes on that were ironed, and then you went to work. So making sure you've got that messaging clear that you want to be sharing.
Well, and what you pointed out with not something fake, I think that it's like can sometimes become like a character that people feel like they've needed to invent. So I like that yourself plus 10% answer. So you talk a lot about the three critical components of a successful personal brand. Create, live, sell. How do these fit together and ultimately help you to convey a coherent personal brand?
So a lot of people think about maybe the creation of it, or they think about maybe how they live it. And unless you're in a sales or marketing capacity, you probably don't think much about selling it. But in order to really, truly leave that legacy and create that powerful personal brand, you have to have all three. And so it begins with a plan of truly crafting what you want that to look like, who can help you get the word out, who can help you keep the narrative, like I had said a minute ago, but also really with intention. Because again, you're selling a brand. Is it what you mean to be selling? So let's be intentional. And then how you live it day in and day out. And to really sell a personal brand, to get somebody to believe in who you are, there has to be consistency. You're building trust every day with every action. And we see this with celebrities when they go off brand. They do something out of character. It damages their persona. It damages their personal brand. So we have to look at how you're able to live that day in and day out. And then the most important part is selling it. And that's why I titled the book Sell Yourself, because we forget that part. The operative word there is sell. And there is a sales process that goes into that. And it's really important that people recognize they're selling something already. But if you borrow some of those skills from a sales professional, you can sell it even more effectively.
That is an important way to think about it too. And I think, for me, it's always made sense. And I take a step back and realize I am a marketing professional. And as you talked about, people that kind of are already looking at things through that lens of marketing and sales, those dots might be a little more connected automatically, but that is kind of some work for someone that may be, a newscaster building their personal brand, or someone else that may not have that kind of direct insight into marketing and selling oneself.
It's so true. And a lot of people have this negative connotation of sales to begin with.
Yeah.
So, some of this is getting over what I call the ick factor of sales and recognizing that you're selling something anyways, you might as well sell it on purpose. And like you said, as a marketer and I'm a salesperson, so we both understand this is day in and day out of what we eat, sleep, and breathe. But for the regular human who doesn't see that, what I want them to embrace is the fact that they are selling already and they are convincing someone of who they are. And there are ways to do this more effectively and efficiently if they borrow from sales and marketing for sure. And by the way, it's also about how we're building that trust again with those folks around us, because if we're selling something and we're selling it inconsistently, or we're selling them something and then not delivering on it, that's doing nothing but tearing apart the brand you're trying to create as well. So it's really important that you sell with intention.
That's such a good point in terms of intention. I thought of something as we were talking about all this, and we've been, looking at the sales and marketing overlay. And I like I mentioned, I love your story about the newscaster that you interviewed in the book. Maybe we've zoomed past something that some folks might have a question about, and I guess I've kind of stumped myself thinking about this. Who needs a personal brand? Does everyone need a personal brand?
Absolutely. And you have one whether you realize it or not. So, so the answer is 100% yes.
So everybody, so this applies to everyone. And if someone pushes back on that, what might be the output of that personal brand that they have?
Well, thinking about how your friends and family know you, right? So let's take it out of a business context and let's put it in a personal context. Are you the one that remembers everybody's birthdays in your family, and then there's an expectation that you're just going to take care of things? Okay, great. If that's what you want to be known as. But if you're really sick and tired of being that person, you have to recognize that's what you've been selling people on. That's part of your brand. So if you want to rebrand yourself, that takes some intention, that takes a sales process. But let's also say that you want your team or your family to stop seeing you as the baby or the newbie or the, new team member, the young team member. I hear this a lot from millennials and Gen Zs where they're like, nobody takes me seriously. You got to sell the fact that you should be taken seriously, and you have to sell it. And so often we think our work speaks for itself or our actions speak for themselves. They do, but you have to be intentional about those actions, and you have to really defend your brand and control that narrative of it and make sure that those around you know how you want to be known. And it's harder to do than people think with intention, because we think, I just go out and I live my life and I'm who I am. That's great. But it actually takes some effort to keep that up. And what I would also say for people in the workplace is how your colleagues view you and the things they ask you to do on a daily basis is absolutely a reflection of your brand that you're selling them. So if you are continually asked to do base level stuff, not senior level, not advanced, you're selling them on the fact that that is what you do and that is who you want to be known as. If you want more responsibility, you're going to have to raise your hand. You're going to have to sell them on the idea you're the person that can do that job.
On Brand, we'll be right back after this.
This episode is brought to you by Paycor. Paycor empowers leaders to build winning teams. With Paycor, leaders can recruit, onboard and train employees, set goals, and drive performance. If you're a leader, everyone depends on you. Who do leaders depend on? Paycor. Learn more at paycor.com/leaders.
People love what's next. The big new thing that everyone has to have. But how do you fight through the idea-ending silos, barriers, and endless meetings? With Smartsheet, just lay out the perfect process, then grab the best people and resources, automate tasks, and meet every change with flexibility. Everybody together, delivering great work and ready for what's next. Visit smartsheet.com/power your process.
Now, back to the show. So we've been talking a lot about what you want to be known as. And it does make me think of another point of intersection with our work lives. How does your personal brand intersect with a job title? Does it?
I do think it does. And I think that it depends on what your sort of day job is versus your, life job, if you will. But if you examine how your family sees you, and I think we have multiple facets to our brands, truthfully. I think that we have, a lot of us have multiple things. We're siblings or spouses or managers or leaders or blah, 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 blah. So if you have all those multiple facets, which most every human being on the planet does, which ones do you elevate in the moment to help you get closer to what you want to achieve in terms of your legacy? And so I do think there's an an intersection of them, and they should all be really grounded in your core values, quite frankly, of who you are and who you want to be known as. Otherwise, it's going to be harder to keep up. But there may be different aspects of your brand. So like at work, I'm probably not going to talk about my dog unless that comes up in conversation, but I'm a total crazy dog mom. So, that's not one of those personal pieces, but it will come up in conversation. And if a client talks about their dog, then of course I will too. But knowing that all of those are a bit fluid and they fly, kind of flow in and out of each other, but knowing at what moment and the right opportunity to elevate or highlight that facet of your brand is actually the biggest key in selling your brand.
Your dog example makes me laugh only because I was late to this very interview because I told you that my day's gotten away from me a bit. My dog, my big golden retriever, has an ear infection, so she was dropped off there this morning, and this was like a window of time between meetings when I could get her out of the vets and back here recuperating. So, but I didn't know the dog mom thing. So I didn't lead with the dog. My last meeting went long. So
I love it.
And in looking at all these different interactions and different layers of who we are at work, I think there's an interesting push and pull that happens when you have organizational brands and personal brands. And I'm not sure organizations always know how to best leverage the personal brands of their people and vice versa. So what does this interplay look like? Because it seems at a glance like a high tide should raise all ships, but it can be a tricky conversation.
I literally just wrote a blog about this a couple of months ago because I do think they're often confused. And the company brand is different than the personal brand. And hopefully you've hired based on values. Hopefully there is a shared mission and vision. And hopefully your team, is truly living the brand of the company day in and day out, and it intersects nicely with their personal brands. However, that doesn't necessarily happen just on chance and on accident. And I think it's really important for leaders to recognize that they're building that culture, and you build a stronger culture by elevating each person's superpowers, is what I call them in the book. But it's really what every person brings to the table that makes them unique. And I think there's been a bit of a shift in the business world in the last couple of decades where we went from sort of all sameness, where, the image that comes to mind is all navy blue suits, right? We're not all navy blue suits anymore. Now there is the era of the individual. There is the era of individuality and individual contributors creating that greater impact. And the culture is embracing all of that. But the only way that you're going to get everybody to speak up and step up is through them selling their personal brands and feeling like they have an opportunity to do so. And there was a company that I did a keynote for in January for their revenue kickoff event. And I had a couple of slides in there about personal branding. That wasn't the topic, by the way. The topic was sales and sort of team selling. And they asked me to come back when they went through a rebrand as a company and speak to literally every single person in the organization, the 1,700 employees internationally, about selling their personal brands, because they recognized each person in that company is an ambassador for the company, a brand ambassador. And the more they can tell their personal story and intersect it with the company story, the stronger the company is going to be.
I feel like, plus I'm a word nerd. So a lot of episodes, I digress because I also think that language and labels that we have for talking about what we do are important. And you just brought up another one of brand ambassadors. And I feel like we get that. As organizations, we get that because, that's someone acting on behalf of our organizational brand. But we get a little scared when someone starts talking about their personal brand because we're afraid that it is hierarchically going to trump our brand, when a lot of times they can work well together, but again, it's sort of a tricky conversation to navigate.
It is, but I think that I would invite leaders to recognize that you're stronger for it if everybody brings their best selves to work. And there's a term called the diminishing manager, which is basically your team only steps up when you're not there. And that's a problem. And usually it's not something malicious that the leader is doing. It's that they don't want to burden them. They don't, they've sort of filed everybody in their individual places and where they live. But yet those folks can really spread their wings when that manager or leader is gone. If that's the only time your team is stepping up, that tells you something about the personal brand you're selling. We want to be selling that everybody feels comfortable speaking up, and stepping forward. And so I think that that's one of those pieces in business that's shifting. And especially given, at the time of this recording, we're coming through the Great Resignation, then the Great Remorse, and then the Great Reset. I truly believe the next phase is the Great Rebrand for individuals as well as organizations.
So you mentioned, as we've been talking about individuals, you mentioned leaders. How does a leader brand, a leadership brand, or a leader's brand at an organization differ from a standard personal brand?
Well, it is their personal brand, but it's part of that, right? It's one of the facets of their brand is that leadership legacy that they're leaving. And it's very interesting because I, as an executive coach, I coach a lot of leaders, obviously, and many times they're unaware of what they're selling in their personal brand. They think, oh, but I'm a fair manager. I do this, I do that. Is that enough? And I believe there's a difference between management and leadership. I think management is process oriented. I think leadership is people oriented. So just because you get all the time clocks right and you make sure everybody has their hardware and software and access and all those things, that's the management side. What are you doing to inspire, to motivate, to do professional development? Does your team feel like they can come to you and give you feedback? Do they feel like they can share, challenges that they're having? And if not, that's really where that leadership, that sort of peopling side of the job comes into play. And if that's not important to you, then don't do it, obviously. But if that is important to you in the legacy that you leave behind, which most leaders, I think, would identify with, that has to be executed with some great intention.
Yeah, that's such a great distinction too. I love quick and specific definitions, like management being process, leadership being people, and it almost seems, I know your newscaster said your personal brand or plus 10%, and it almost feels like there's a leadership lens or a leadership hat on your personal brand that is an aspect of it as well. You mentioned the Great Resignation earlier. How does your personal brand change, evolve, or should it, if you're looking for that next adventure?
So I think that we have all been evolving and will continue to evolve. But when you are intentionally making a turn in your career, in your, private life, any of those things, I think it's very important that you recognize what you have to leave behind to make that turn, what you're going to need that's different to make that turn, and who can help you along the way. And a lot of people through the Great Resignation have shifted jobs. They've, shifted careers even, full pivot. When you do that, you give everybody around you whiplash if you're not careful. And so we want to make sure that a rebranding is successful, because your personal brand that you have sold everyone on, whether it was intentional or not, you sold them on who you are. Well, now they're going to have to refile you in something else. So the problem is getting it very, very clear of what that new brand is going to be, how everyone can understand why you're doing it so they can support it, so you can build trust in it. Because that's really, no sale happens without trust. We all know that. And they've trusted this one aspect of you, this brand that you've had. So let's say that you've been a marketer your entire career in corporate, and now you're going to shift and go out on your own. Not everybody understands that entrepreneurial spirit. So you're going to have to sell them on the idea that you're going to do well at this. And remember, everybody wants the best for you, so their intentions are pure, I'm sure. But they need to understand how to refile you as you're shifting this role.
You know, in talking about everything, this podcast is called On Brand, and the opposite of that would be off brand. So do you have another one of those quick and easy definitions for how someone knows if something that they're doing may or may not be off brand?
Absolutely. I think that when we start recognizing people's reactions to us and it's not what we intended, that is a really good signal that we are somehow off brand in their mind, that they're surprised by something we did. They're surprised. Anybody that knows me or knows you at this point now knows we love our dogs. So, but if we didn't talk about our dogs and then all of a sudden we made a comment, that would seem off brand, perhaps, but maybe not, because you're caring, I'm caring, we support others, we're, compassionate people. So maybe that's not that big of a stretch, right? To say, oh, they're animal lovers too. But if you're really going off brand, and we see this with celebrities all the time, where they've done something in the public eye that flies in the face of who we know them as, it's really hard to recover from that. And you've got to be really living your personal brand day in and day out, which is that second segment that I talk about in the book, because that's how you're going to stay on brand. And if you go off brand, you're going to have to work twice as hard to get back on brand, regain that trust.
That is a great point to make at the end of a concise definition as well. It makes me think of getting back to the benefit that sales language gives us, the thing of, working so much harder to get a new customer versus keeping an existing one. And I mean, it's a matter of trust. And like you said, repairing that when it comes to your personal brand is time consuming. So definitely worth the foresight there. Cindy, we've made one another smile with our dog references, but it is the time in the show where I get to ask you for a brand that has made you smile recently.
So the brand that has made me smile recently was actually an airline, and it was an awful day. I'll be honest. It was an awful day. We were on and off the airplane, sitting on the tarmac. It was just one of those days, mechanical issues, flight crew timed out, all the things. And when they took us off the plane, it was the honesty of the pilot making the announcement. It was the compassion of the flight attendants as we disembarked. It was the compassion and recognition of how valuable all of our time was by the gate agents. And, they do the things where they bring out the snacks and the water. It wasn't the snacks and the water. It was the communication that made the difference and the way they kept us informed throughout. Now, granted, I was getting app updates because, I fly all the time, but it was that actual communication that made the difference. And here's the worst part, Nick. I was in the airport for almost 9 hours. 9 hours waiting for this flight. Turned out to be a red eye. Was not supposed to be. But they still made me smile because they were genuine about their concern and their honor of our time and how frustrating this was, where they could have just been pretty exacerbated themselves throughout the whole process. And they weren't. They really, really made concerted effort to take care of us during what was a really crummy day.
Well, it's so rare that an airline gets to be the good smile here on the show. Which airline was it?
It was United Airlines.
Ah, well, good deal, United. So making the skies a little friendlier. Cindy, where can folks go to learn more about who you are and what you do?
drcindy.com, drcindy.com. And the new book is Sell Yourself, and they can go to sellyourselfbook.com to learn a little more. And there's some nice little freebies on there to help people with their own personal brands.
Awesome. Well, we will link up to all of that in our show notes, which folks can always find at onbrandpodcast.com. Cindy, thanks for being on brand with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Nick. It's been a pleasure.
On Brand is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if we've made you smile, you can always listen free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite platform may be. And please take a moment and rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. Until next week, I'm Nick Westergaard, and I'll see you on the internet.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.